Wonderful. Well, welcome everybody. I see lots more people starting to file in. It's so great to have you here today. Today we will be discussing, this is like actually a part 2 to a previous webinar we had. The state of New Jersey came out with some additional information in November as to the New Jersey applications. So this is a continuation from a previous webinar that we did. If you missed our first webinar, it is available on our website at mrcannabislaw.com under the blog section. So if for some reason you did not catch it, please go check on it there. We are not going to repeat everything that we covered in the first session. We will go over some of the introductory terms just so you're not completely lost. However, a lot of the material is going to be different. So my name is Amanda Barton. I am a partner at Mr. Cannabis Law. Mr. Cannabis Law is a boutique law firm that is full service for clients in the cannabis and psychedelic industries. We are gearing up to do lots of applications. A lot of states are coming online for adult use: New York, New Jersey, Connecticut. I know Ohio recently was accepting applications, and there are some more coming down the pipeline. So this presentation is specific as to New Jersey. Please keep in mind that anything that is discussed here today is not intended as legal advice, but rather general information for your educational purposes. Also, by watching this webinar, we are not creating an attorney-client relationship. If you would like to become a client of the firm, please feel free to reach out to us after the webinar. We'd be happy to discuss that. Also, in certain states, some of this material may be considered attorney advertisement. So just be aware of that. And at that time, with that, I'd love to introduce our other panelists. We have Andy Sick, who is of counsel with Mr. Cannabis Law. Andy, would you like to give a brief introduction about yourself?
Sure, thanks, Amanda. Like Amanda said, my name is Andy Sick. I'm an attorney as of counsel with Mr. Cannabis Law. I also have my own firm, Sick Legal, where I do startup and business and transactional work. I have about 15 years of experience in the business field doing transactional things, startups, corporate stuff, as well as some litigation work too. At Mr. Cannabis Law, I do a lot of the work in New Jersey, New York, and Connecticut, where I have bar licenses. So we do a lot of the application processes up here, as well as a lot of the cannabis and psychedelic related business work. And yeah, so that's the general gist of things. And I'll turn it back over to Amanda. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us, Andy. We also have Paula Savchenko, who's also an attorney. She also is the founding member of a Canacor group. Paula, thank you so much for joining. It's great to see you again. Could you give us a little information about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Amanda. Hi, guys. Thanks for joining us today to talk about New Jersey. Sorry about my voice. I'm not feeling the best today. But anyway, nice to meet everyone. And I am an attorney and consultant. I work primarily in the cannabis industry. I have my own law firm, PS Law Group, and also Canacor Group. And I work closely with Amanda, Andy, and Dustin on multi-state expansion for businesses in the cannabis industry. Right now, we are working on a couple of projects in New Jersey, and we're excited to be talking to you here today.
Great, thank you so much. Without further ado, we will kind of jump right into it. You will hear us referring to the CRC, and just for those of you who don't know, the CRC is the Cannabis Regulatory Commission in the state of New Jersey. They're basically the agency that kind of oversees the adult use cannabis program. So if you do hear us using that acronym, that is what it relates to. We also just, basically jumping into it, Paula, can you we're kind of going to just do a refresher on some terminology. Can you briefly explain, Paula, when the CRC refers to like a class of licenses, what do you think they mean?
Yeah, sure. So when they're referring to a class of licenses, they're referring to whether it's retail, cultivation, or manufacturing. And then there's also distribution, wholesale, and transportation, which haven't been released yet. So we had the application process open up December 15th for the cultivation and manufacturing licenses. And then March 15th is going to be retail, and I'm not sure when the other licenses are going to open up. And then we also have different types of licenses within the different classes, and that includes micro business license, conditional license, which can be converted to an annual license, and then an annual license.
Wonderful. Can you kind of explain the difference between the annual standard license and the annual micro license?
Yeah, sure. So for the micro license, there's a couple qualifications that you have to be able to apply for it. And then there's also restrictions on that license. So the qualifications are that you have to be a resident of the town that you're applying for the micro license in. And I believe you also have to meet a certain threshold requirement for your you also have to meet a certain threshold requirement for your salary for the prior year. And then for the annual license, there's the conditional and so that's for the bigger license. There's a conditional and annual. And then for conditional, you also have to meet a certain threshold requirement for your salary. And for annual, you don't have to meet any threshold requirement. And then on top of that, for micro, the restrictions are that you can only have 10 employees. And there's caps on the production as far as cultivation, manufacturing, and then also retail. And then conditional is that was the only restriction to qualify was there's no restriction on the production. And then you convert the conditional to an annual license within, I believe, 120 days. And after operating the micro license for 1 year, you can convert that to an annual license as well. So you can request to have additional canopy space. Like, for example, for a micro license for cultivation, you can only have 2,500 square feet for the first year of operations. From there, you can request to convert to annual and ask for more canopy space. There isn't really that much clarity as far as how that entire process is going to go, but we do know that you're going to be able to ask for more space. And then for the conditional and annual licenses, you can ask for, I believe it's starting at 10,000 square feet and it goes up to 150,000 square feet of canopy space for cultivation.
Wow, that's impressive. That's a big facility. Thank you for that. And as we'll be discussing later, these licenses and the priority, these are very important for priority that we will be discussing later. So as far as the conditional license, Andy, do you know what the limit is on the cap for the adjusted gross income in order to qualify as a conditional applicant?
Yes. So if you're going to qualify as a conditional applicant, there's basically two different categories you can fall into. One would be if your last tax filings were filed individually, then the cap on income there is $200,000. And if you file jointly, your joint income tax returns could be no more than $400,000 to fall under the conditional category.
Great. I believe there's also a requirement that you have resided in the state for at least 2 years as of the date of the application. I think it's only applies to one owner, but there is also a residency requirement for at least one of the owners having lived there for 2 years as of the date of the application. Andy, can you kind of explain a little bit about the application acceptance process and award process? You know, is it done, how is it going to be conducted? In some states, they do a lottery basis. Sometimes there's just a flat out deadline. Some states do it on a rolling basis. Can you explain kind of how it is in New Jersey?
Yeah, sure. So New Jersey's doing it on a rolling basis. And so how that's going to go is it becomes first in time that gets there as long as they're in line with the priorities involved. So you know, when they open up the applications, like application deadlines or the initial dates, you want to get it in at like as close to or on that date as possible in order for your application to be reviewed in that order that they come in. And so then that'll have a big impact on, you know, things further down the road as to who gets licenses, who gets into the different municipalities that are allowing these businesses to exist there, because that's where, and we can maybe talk about it later, but that's where the restrictions really seem to be coming in, is on the local level.
Yes, I would definitely love, and that's kind of where we're going to end up, is talking about the importance of the municipal component of this. Right now, we're just going to focus kind of on the application itself. But yeah, I agree, that's hugely important as far as, you know, how quickly you apply. And I think, yeah, the municipal component is huge here. So we'll talk about that in a little bit, but it's good to point out now. I appreciate that. You mentioned priority. What do you mean by priority, order of priority?
Sure. So the CRC has a priority list, which basically it like determines the order in which the applications will be reviewed. So basically, you want to get into one of these the highest priority category that you can possibly get into in order for your application to be reviewed first. Otherwise, it kind of just gets pushed down the line, and you have to wait for all these other applicants that have a higher priority to have their applications reviewed first, and then it would be your turn. So like the different orders of priority here for us would, as New Jersey has it set out, would be there's a social equity business as a then a diversity owned business, then an impact zone business, then applicants receiving bonus points, then all of these are conditional. So first the priority goes all the conditional applications, then it's in those particular categories that I mentioned. Then it'll go to people that are not doing conditional applications. So it'll be social equity businesses that are doing annual licenses, diversity owned businesses that are doing annual licenses, impact zone businesses that are doing annual licenses, and so on. So basically what you want to do is, if possible, to increase your chances of getting your application reviewed first, is make it conditional if you fall into one of those protected categories, those income categories. And then you want to, if you can have a social equity business, that's the number one thing you would go after, you would try to get. Then a diversity owned business, then impact zone, and then other bonus points categories. So you kind of work down the line in that way. And then also in there's also subcategories for each. Paula had mentioned micro businesses. So that's another, those micro businesses get granted priority over standard businesses. So if you're a micro owned business with social equity status and doing a conditional application, then you're at the very front of the line. So like if you can do a micro business, or if that's what you're going after, that's how you increase your chances by falling into those categories.
Got you. Thank you for that explanation. Yeah, priority is hugely important. So I do want to kind of focus on this for a second. Now, let's say you apply as a conditional applicant. How do you convert that? So from my understanding, the conditional application process is you apply for a conditional license. And if it's granted, at that point, as Paula mentioned, you have 120 days basically to submit more documentation and try to convert it to either the micro business or license or the standard business license. Can you explain that a little bit, Andy, as far as, is that the understanding, or, do you have anything specific as to the conditional conversion applications?
Basically the conditional conversion applications will allow you to, basically it gives you time to like secure your location and get the real estate that you need. So that's what they're doing. So you don't have to get things you don't have to lock down real estate beforehand. You can find out if you're going to be potentially awarded a license. So then once you have that in hand, then you can choose the location, work with the town, figure everything out. You have this time to work through it and then once you do that, once you have the permission of the town, the municipality, and you have the location, then you can convert. So it's a nice way of giving people a chance to get into the process without having the real estate part settled.
Right. And I mean, that's huge advantage to like small businesses or entrepreneurs, because locking down real estate when you don't even know if you're going to be awarded a license, it can be a very expensive thing. paying rent before you even apply. It's definitely a huge consideration. That being said, though, I mean, there's only so much real estate that maybe will fall into proper zoning and whatnot. So it is important to start looking for real estate now, even if you are planning to be a conditional applicant. And this is a question to both of you. Why do you think the CRC is giving such high priority to conditional applicants? We see like the first 6 categories are all reserved for conditional applicants. Do you have any idea as to why they're doing that?
Yeah, I think it's because in the past, in New Jersey and other states, we've seen a lot of multi-state operators kind of create a monopoly. And there's been a push from the lobbying side and just people wanting to get involved that are not multi-state operators and break into the industry. And it's been communicated to, the governor's office and everybody, the CRC, all of them, that there should be some type of avenue for these people to get involved. So now for smaller businesses to get involved. So now you're seeing a push across the country in states that are opening up applications for minority applications, small business owned and women owned applications. And especially in New Jersey, their last process had a diversity component to it. Their last applications processes had diversity components involved. But a lot of people that applied had an issue with it because they felt that even though there was some priority for them, it didn't really get handed out that way. And so now, and on top of it, a lot of people involved in the last process had an issue with women-owned businesses being given the licenses because, and it was really women that were somehow related to white males that wanted to get involved in the industry and had deep pockets, but that was the face of it. And so now there's more of a push towards the minorities getting involved as opposed to women owned, even though you don't see that written in paper, but if you read articles on it, that's what's happening. And I think we're going to kind of start to see that shift across the country now. So it is very important to have the social equity components worked out. And it's interesting. I mean, I've done applications in a couple states now, and I'm used to working with social equity programs. But the way that New Jersey chose to do the social equity and minority program, it really makes sure that the minorities and the social equity people are benefiting somewhat from it. And it's harder to mask it with just a straw man social equity. And what I'm saying by straw man is a lot of groups will just bring in someone and pay them something like, $5,000, pay a social equity or minority person $5,000 to go on an application and then have them go away after that, right? So they're never really truly involved. However, the way New Jersey set it up, they made it more difficult because you're required to qualify for social equity. You are required to have the social equity person hold 51% ownership. And same thing with minority or women owned. And just for anybody on this call that doesn't know what it takes to qualify for social equity in New Jersey, it's that you either have to have a prior conviction related to marijuana or 2 prior charges related to marijuana. And or you have to live in an impact zone and have below the I think it was below 80% of the median income, which would be below, I want to say it was 35,000. So people are actually going out and looking for these people to go on the application, forming relationships with them, and then having them hold 51% equity. But if you're trusting someone with that, then you're going to want them to be involved and actually receive a benefit moving forward. Or what you're doing is setting yourself up for potentially someone taking over a large portion of your company. So I don't completely agree with the way that the CRC has done this, because I think that I do appreciate that they're trying to benefit minorities and social equity groups, and I understand what they're trying to do. But I think that what's going to happen is like Andy was saying, for the conditional applications, you don't have to have everything lined up on the back end, right? And so what we're going to see is a lot of groups that are true social equity applicants and not partnered already with someone that has experience in this industry and money. They're going to be scrambling. Let's say they're awarded a license and then they're scrambling to find both money and an operator. And again, they may be putting themselves in a position to be taken advantage of, or if they don't get that together in the right time, then they're losing the license. So I just think, there's no perfect way to do it, but I am a little bit concerned about that.
I agree. And I'll just jump into it right now, because we were going to talk about it a little bit later, but I agree, because it's only 120 days, right? So you get notice of approval of your conditional license and you have 120 days to meet all the other requirements. You can get a one-time extension for an additional 45 days, but I mean, that's under 6 months, basically. That's basically about 4 or 5 months to get all those pieces of the pie together. And it's an extensive amount of material. It's not only securing the location, but it's also getting municipal approval, entering into a peace agreement with a labor organization, doing all the other parts of the application, which are extensive. We'll talk about them, but I mean, there's a whole list of all these SOPs and all the documents you have to get together. And I agree. I just don't think that's enough time for, if you have a smaller shop or a minority that hasn't ever done this before, a social equity applicant that isn't maybe the most sophisticated business person. It's just not enough time to allow them to get all that together. And it does set them up to be taken advantage of if they're scrambling and trying to bring somebody in at the last moment to help. That's why we're really advocating here today. Even if you're going to go for a conditional license, start working on the conversion app before you even know, possibly, if you get awarded a license, just so you're setting yourself up for the best chance of success of completing those within the required time frame. So yeah, I think that's hugely important. And I think that's a very good observation, Paula. You know, that's some very good information you shared. Thank you for that. Andy, did you have anything to add? I know we kind of just went on a little bit of a rant.
No, that was great. No, I don't really have much to add. Paula answered that really well. I guess the only thing that's just kind of like the backbone of this and why we're talking about that is, and why they're doing this is because they're trying to, part of the legislation is to remedy some of the effects of the war on drugs. So that's why we're also seeing, these other categories getting put to the front of the line. So that's just kind of the general backbone of what, like, for people to understand why this is happening and why it's not just being given out to whoever. I will say, like, it's interesting, like, as a critique, like Paula was doing it, like Connecticut, for example, is doing a lottery system where there's one social equity lottery and then there's one regular lottery. So you kind of just get put into two different categories, and then you see who gets it from there. So that feels like it opens it up a bit more, allows different people to potentially get involved and not penalize people in a certain way, but also prioritizing social equity applicants.
Yeah, I like the fact that in Connecticut, and not to get too far off topic, that you can, if you fall in the social equity bucket and don't get selected out of the lottery, you also then get put into the second bucket. So you get kind of 2 bites at the apple of getting a license. However, I absolutely, from a personal perspective, absolutely hate the lottery system, because what we do as lawyers is maximize every single point on a client's application. So to the point that you meet the bare threshold, you can get put into a lottery and get a license over someone who's much more qualified. So personally, I don't like the lottery system, but that's just my feelings on the lottery. But I do, they approached it differently, and I appreciate it for what it is. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, and I agree with you on the lottery system. I mean, like, in Illinois, they ended up doing it that way. And I know so many people that had a perfect score on their retail apps, but then weren't selected, right?
Mhm.
And I get it that they only have so many licenses to give out, but the threshold to enter into the lottery was if you were so that was perfect score. Then for the cultivation manufacturing, the threshold to enter into the lottery was if you were in the top 15%. And I just think that they should have made that percentage higher because they had so many applicants. And I mean, it's always tricky with the lottery system that way. And I just want to point out that the same advisor the same group that advised Illinois on how to go through their application process without getting sued, which we all know how that goes, is the same group that's advising New Jersey, and or one of them. And New Jersey has in their regulations that they can open up a lottery system if they want to, actually. And they have to, so they kind of left it pretty open. We don't really know exactly how it's going to go,
Right.
but they put everyone in a position that you have to put your best foot forward because they may score it. Or they can open up a lottery system and they have to notice everyone that they're going to close the lottery system within 90 days. And then they can go ahead, or I'm sorry, they have to notice that they're going to close the application and open up a lottery system in 90 days. And then they can go forward with a lottery system. So there's a lot to still be determined for how New Jersey is going to play out. But I will
I've been
say
trying
that,
to ignore that portion of it because, yeah, we just don't know anything, you know? So like you said, put your best foot forward. But yeah, that's a very good point to point out, is that they even have that component.
right. And then another thing is, I mean, we know that the cultivation is going to get capped at 37 until February 2023. But after that, we don't know what the cultivation is going to, we don't know if it's going to be capped, not capped. I'm sure it'll be some kind of in between, but what does that framework look like if you don't get one of the first 37? And then are you in a better position to apply for one of the 37 super licenses that you can apply for 150,000 square feet? Or are you in a better position applying for a micro license that only allows for 2,500 square feet for the first year of operations and then asking to convert, but you're guaranteed to get a micro license? So like there's so much strategy that goes into deciding what makes sense for each client on the front end just before you even get started. And then on the manufacturing retail side, the CRC has been pretty clear that they're not going to cap that at all on the state level. But on the local level, and Andy, I know you were talking about this earlier, they are going to allow caps. So especially on retail, it's basically who do you know and where can you get a letter of support is going to decide how successful you are in getting the retail.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a great segue into discussing that, specifically the municipal component. Like you just mentioned, Paula, there's a cap on cultivating licenses at a state level to 37 until February of 2023, like you mentioned. However, all the other licenses, there are no caps currently. However, where we are seeing kind of the cap is kind of at the local municipality level. And every different township and municipality is now starting to come out with regulations or a process or how you go about getting and syncing their approval, because there is great interest. So Newark, I know, created their own application process, which already passed. I don't know if they're going to reopen that or what they're doing with that, or if it's going to be thrown out the window. But each, municipality is different in what they're requiring. So it's imperative that you look towards your municipality and start seeking that approval early. Like if they're only going to allow 5 retail places, you want to secure one of those 5 approvals or recommendations. So to the extent like you think you have time to wait for that later, the time to act is now. You definitely want to start securing that municipal approval now. Do you guys have anything else to weigh? I know it's a super important topic and issue when it comes to the application process. Do you have anything to add about the municipality abilities?
I mean, they just have a lot of power here, which you alluded to. You know, they can, you know, it says like basically they can determine whether or not you exist there, and you know you have to get a letter from them, and then in order to get the approval from the state. So you know there's a lot involved there, just like getting that letter. And you know if they don't want you there, they don't have to give it. That being said, the state doesn't necessarily have to adhere to this letter requirement, but I mean it seems like it was, you know, they're allowed to if they want to. So it seems like they want to give a lot of deference towards these municipalities as to what's allowed.
Yeah, I mean, according to the application requirements that we're discussing here today, I mean, it is required to be submitted as part of your application packet. Again, like you said, they have the ability to throw it out the window at any time, but as of now, they are requiring 100% for every application. Micro business or not, it applies across the board. You need municipal approval. Paula, I know you're very involved at the local levels. Do you have anything to add about the municipalities? Any insight?
I mean, I think we pretty much covered it. It's basically just, I guess one thing I could add is it looks like about 30% of localities are allowing retail in. If you choose to go into one of the localities that has already allowed it in, like you said, Amanda, you got to get going now. There's a lot of localities that are waiting on the right person to approach them. So that would be either someone that already has a relationship with them, or that's from New Jersey, or a strong operator that can come in and either bring a lot of tax revenue, or that can show that they have retail facilities in bigger towns in other states, and it hasn't caused you know, security issues, additional crime, doesn't look like California, Venice Beach, that kind of stuff. So it's kind of like a combination of all that. I'm working with a few municipalities right now with clients to open up their process, you know, to open up either an application process on the local level or just to open up the town in general. And that just starts with a conversation with the city council, either through the right person or through a cold call, and just saying, you know, hey, we're interested in entering your town. We wanted to educate you, because a lot of the time it's just about lack of education. And we wanted you to understand that this can be really good for your town, because the towns can charge a 2% tax. And so once you start having that conversation, obviously they're more interested. And then if you're going to be providing additional community development support to them, which can look like many, many different things, get creative, then that kind of opens the door a little more. And then having a strong operator that, or just a group that can show that they're going to be able to secure the facility, and all that really helps as well. So it's really just starts with education, I think. But I guess the biggest recommendation I would have is probably, if you want to go into, if it's me and I'm looking at it from a strategy perspective, I would start looking at towns that haven't opened up yet and try to get them to open up for my application, if that's your interest here for the people on the call.
Good recommendation. Absolutely, because people have already been working on this, and if you know, if there's a town that's already announced that they're open, a lot of people are rushing to that town. So I think that's some great inside information and insight for other people on this call. jumping back to the priority, Paula, so with the, let's say somebody qualifies as both social equity and an impact zone business, do they get, because they hit two of the boxes, do they get super priority, or how is the CRC kind of judging that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So for purposes of the priority, you're not getting additional priority. It's just whoever hits the top priority, right? So Andy was talking about that social equity going for a conditional license is going to get the top priority. And then we're going to go down from there to minority, to anybody. So you got conditional first, then you got annual, right? So you got social equity, minority, women owned, and then impact zone. That's the order. And then you start over again in annual. So no, they're just going to give you the highest priority for which you qualify. However, if you do have like a double social equity or double minority or women certification as part of your application, then if they're deciding between you and another group that are in the same scored in the same place, and presented or submitted around the same time, then you'll get, at that point, you'll get priority. That's the only time it's going to make a difference. And then I will say though, that it's not going to hurt you to have multiple certifications or multiple qualifications. Like for the applications I've done, I've tried to make sure that we qualify for each of them, because there is a diversity component to every application score, regardless of if you're getting priority for that or not. And also for community development, inclusion, all of that. So you should still be talking about that throughout your conversation, or sorry, throughout your application.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a very good point. Just because it doesn't really affect your priority by having 2 out of the 3. Like you said, it does definitely go to the total application and the point allocations and the fact that they really are looking for diversity. So I think that's a good point. I just want to circle back because I think you made a really good point, because I think a lot of these small businesses are going to qualify as diversity owned. So for instance, just to clarify, if in the diversity category, there's really 3 things that can qualify you as diversity owned. You could either be a minority, which is 51% owner and manager, or you can be a woman owned, or you could be a disabled veteran. So if you get 2 out of the 3 is what you were saying, then if you hit more than 1, you get more priority over the other categories in that diversity owned bucket. So for instance, if I was a minority woman, I would qualify for 2 out of the 3. So I would maybe win over Andy, let's say, who actually, I don't know if Andy qualifies for any of them. Let's pretend he was a veteran, a disabled veteran. Then he only had 1. In that case, I would get priority over him because we're in the same bucket. I just think that's a really good point for people to realize, is you can get more than 1. And you would, if you can qualify for more than 1 of those diversity owned businesses categories, you want certifications in as many as you can. Yeah.
And just a little addition to those certifications take some time too. So like, if this is something you're interested in doing, you want to get your corporation or LLC formed and get going on that certification, because if that's going to be part of your submission to the state. So that would be something you'd want to be getting going on immediately.
Yeah, I mean, just to clarify, so what Andy's referring to, there is a certification that is issued directly from the state. Andy, do you know the agency? I don't remember the agency that issues those.
Maybe it's the Department of Treasury. I'm not sure, but
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you actually need a separate certification from that agency before you even apply as diversity owned. You cannot prove diversity owned through the application process. You have to have that certification. So very, very good point to mention. We had a question from the audience. Is there a percentage of ownership required for the person qualifying as the social equity applicant?
Yeah, and I think you just answered this, Amanda, too. So it's 51% ownership of the business. So it's not super crazy. Like Connecticut, for example, it's 65%, but in New Jersey, it's 51%.
Awesome. Thank you, Andy. Now, I kind of want to shift. We'll get away from the priorities. I think we've kind of gone over that pretty thoroughly, and we are kind of starting to run out of time. So I definitely want to leave some time for question and answers. I want to talk about the application process itself and the application requirements. Andy, can you kind of talk about some of the more standard, like general background information that's required of all applicants?
Sure. So there's a big list of it, but it includes things like, applicants' legal names and addresses. You're going to need the documentation of the business registration certificate and formation documents and those certifications that we were just talking about. You're going to need your federal and state tax numbers. There's also going to be things like disclosure of persons of interest and or entities of interest, and about people that are connected to your company. So people or organizations that are connected to your company, whether it be people that are funding it or minority owners or different things like that. So there's a pretty extensive amount of information related to there. You also need a proposed location for the business. And also people will have to be willing to cooperate with criminal history background checks and things like that. Fingerprinting, that's going to be another part of it, and that also takes some doing. And then also then like for conditional applicants must provide evidence that each owner has decision-making authority in the organization so that they can actually. So you can't just bring in someone that meets these conditional application requirements. And Paula was talking about this earlier. Someone that just meets these conditional application requirements as a figurehead. There has to be demonstrated evidence that they are actually have a big part in running the organization and are going to be there as well. And that's just it, and that's just a quick summary. There's a lot more. There's a lot more in there.
Yeah, and something to note, we were taking a look and starting on behalf of our clients to fill out those forms regarding to the persons of interest. So those are very time consuming. You have to collect information about your job history for the last 10 years, your where you've lived the last 10 years. You have to get copies of tax returns and whatnot to submit. So it is an extensive amount of background information, although it is, some of it's kind of easy to do. It does take some time to put together. So don't think you're the night before the application is due, or opens up, you're going to be able to just throw all this together. It is pretty time consuming, albeit somewhat general. Are there additional requirements for the annual licenses or the conditional conversion licenses?
Yeah, so they will need to have some of these other things like a site plan or a proposed location, including a floor plan. And you also need evidence of compliance with the local codes and ordinances. Like there's restrictions on how close you can be to a church, synagogue, temple, playground, school, daycare facility, things like that. You also need zoning approval from the local municipal office or whatever office in the town handles zoning issues. You'll need that proof of local support that we were talking about earlier. You'll also need documentation from the landlord or whoever, or if you buy the property, for, like title and things like that, showing that the applicant will have control over the site upon approval by the state of the application. So that's like your proof of securing the location. Depending on the type of application, as long as it's not a micro license, if it's anything but a micro license, you'll also need a bona fide labor organization attestation saying that you've entered into an agreement with them for a labor peace agreement. I think micro businesses and maybe conditional are exempt from that. I'm not quite sure, but there are also other requirements for diversity, social equity, and impact zone businesses about in micro businesses to prove that the applicant meets the requirements for each of those categories. So whether it be income, where you lived, things of that nature.
Got you. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
As to the bona fide labor organizations, yeah, you're right. micro businesses are exempt from that. However, I think conditional standard, right? Because conditional can be attached to either standard or micro business. So I think the micro businesses are exempt, but the conditional standard applicants are not.
That makes sense.
Is my understanding. Paula, as far as you know, the CRC, have they provided details on how they're actually going to score the applications?
Unfortunately, not so much. They have released FAQs, and the notice of application has some information. Obviously, all they've really said is that the application has to be complete, and it's either a 0 or the highest score you can get. There's no in between. So that makes it seem like it's more of like a threshold requirement in a way. But I don't know exactly how that process is going to go. I would love to tell you guys more. I just don't have that information right now.
Yeah, I know that they, in the notice that we're talking, just recently published in November, they did lay out like what the total points were for each type of application. So, but it's very basic, like you mentioned. It's not like substantive whatsoever. So, for like, I believe the conditional applicants, they do say that you have up to 100 points, but they just break it up, and all they say is 40 points can be go towards your business plan and management profile. 50 points go to the regulatory compliance plan, and 10 points go to your plan to obtain liability insurance. I mean, the last one's kind of specific, but as far as like a regulatory compliance plan, they don't give you any insight as what they want that to contain. So that's where a lawyer can really help you, is we can make sure to dissect the regulations, make sure that, you know, put together a compliance plan for you that does hit all the points within the statutes. So yeah, I wish they gave a little bit more information, but it's definitely kind of lacking in what each of those categories should contain. They give a page limit number, but that doesn't really help you much. They also, for the other applications types, do again list the total number of points. I know for conditional conversion, it's 160 points you can get up to. And the annual license applications can earn up to a total of 210 points. I mean, it does kind of lay out those points. I'm not going to spend the night, we're running out of time, so I'm not going to list them all on the webinar right now. You can easily find that in the statement that was released. But yeah, I think it's interesting that they didn't really give any further insight on specifically what should be contained in each of those plans. Just before we open it up for questions to the audience, do you guys have any like last minute thoughts or recommendations, or I'll just open the floor up before we go to Q&A.
I guess one recommendation I have, and this isn't the easiest thing to do, but if you can, if you want to go for an application, I would say look for real estate that is going to be available sometime in the middle to end of next year, because that way, either available or new construction, it will be ready then, because that way you're not spending so much money securing the real estate on the front end. And it's more like you'll have to start paying for that in July or December of next year, or sorry, this year. We're already in this year.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Yeah, Happy New Year. Well, I'm so used to saying next year. But you guys get what I'm saying, so that you're not spending so much money on securing the real estate, and that'll keep your costs lower. And then, you know, at that point you can start paying, because I do think that this process is going to take a minute. I mean, New Jersey has moved way faster than other states that I've been involved in, which has been nice and scary at the same time. But it does take a minute for them to figure out how they're going to score it and who's going to get the licenses and all of that. So I would just try. I guess that's one piece of advice I have.
Smart. I mean, because people don't realize, you know, if you're not haven't owned a business and dealt with real estate, commercial real estate, it's super expensive. So to start paying rent before you even have a license to operate, I mean, you're just losing money monthly, you're bleeding money. So I agree. I think that's a very good recommendation. I guess my recommendation would be to, really, I think Paula hit on this. It's imperative that you strategically think of how you're going to apply and which license you're going to apply for, whether it be a standard, a conditional, or micro business license, because there are components and like nuances to each that may benefit you. So don't just rush to pick one. It might be worth consulting with an attorney. I mean, we have worked very hard, I know, on the clients we have already brought on to help with this process. We have spent tons of time trying to figure out the best way to structure their business and the best way to apply. It really is worth the weight in gold to bring a professional in to help you. Andy, did you have any last minute recommendations or?
I mean, it's just related to yours, and this was brought up before, but I just want to emphasize that, if you're interested in doing this March 15th application time, like for dispensaries and things like that, now really is the time to get going, just because if you're going to get some of these certifications, those are going to take time as well. So, if you're not moving soon, then you won't be able to get the certifications. Then you won't be able to get the priority that you need in order to get your application reviewed in a timely way. So then you get pushed back to the line, not because you're not a minority or diversely owned or a disabled veteran, but just because you didn't get the required certification back from the state in time. So it's just a matter of, like if this is something you want to do, it's time to start plugging away.
Definitely. Feel free to reach out to our firm if you would like help with your application. All three of us would be delighted to help you guys apply. We did have one question come in. If you have other questions, please drop them in the chat now. We will be going into our Q&A session. There was one other question that we already have. Is there any insurance requirements for the applicant at the time of applying or once licensed? So for the conditional applications, you do have to have like a plan to get insurance. That is like 10 points on the application. So you do want to have a plan in place to obtain insurance. We do have, brokers that we work with and providers that we work with that can help you with cannabis that specialize in cannabis insurance. So, feel free to reach out if you do need recommendations or an introduction to those parties. But yes, you will need to get liability insurance.
And just related to that, and you're also going to need banking as well, and that's even part of the minority and diversity owned, and woman owned and disabled veteran owned business certification with the state is you have to indicate the banking institution that you're with, and we can certainly help you there. Connecting you with cannabis friendly banks, but that's another step in the process that helps that can jam things up that if that's not in place beforehand.
That's a great point. I mean, you can't run a cannabis business and go to Bank of America and expect to get a bank account. They just won't bank you. There's a lot of requirements, and it comes down to the fact that at a federal level, it's still illegal. So banking is a huge problem in this industry. You're going to have to go to your smaller state banks or credit unions to find banking, and they are expensive. I mean, some of them do charge because of and there's a reason for it. I mean, right? They have a whole bunch of extra reporting requirements to the IRS and to other institutions, agencies. So they do require much higher monthly fees. Like, we see here in Florida, $200 a month just in banking fees to have a cannabis related account. And it can be much higher if you're directly, involved with cultivating and things like that. So yeah, that's great advice to go ahead and start working on those relationships. Was there any other questions before we close out? We really appreciate you guys all attending. Please feel free to reach out to us. The firm's email address is info@mrcannabislaw.com. You can also visit our website, www.mrcannabislaw.com. We can put you in touch with Paula. Paula, do you want to give a shout out as far as your phone number or website or anything, how people can contact you or we can drop your.
It's all right. We're all together in this. We're good.
Okay. Just making sure. I wanted to give you a shout out. Well, thank you, everybody. We really appreciate you joining today, and we will talk to you all soon. We will have new webinars coming out, so please, pay attention for those. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks for joining.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you for both joining. I really appreciate it.